Hello, and welcome to a very special behind-the-scenes episode of Ghost Inspectors. My name is Victoria Cheng. I'm the co-producer of Ghost Inspectors, and with me is...
Victoria. I'm the writer and co-producer of Ghost Inspectors.
Nice. We planned that. We did not. And today we're going to be talking about the writing process behind Ghost Inspectors, what it's like to write an audio drama, any tips for aspiring writers, and fun facts about the show that you may not know, because you're not us, or one of our friends, or family.
If you do know, teach me your secrets of mind reading, I guess.
Yeah, you might be psychic.
Like Sharon.
Exactly. Well, spoilers.
Debatable.
Spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the show and you're listening to this first, fun. I guess you like writing.
But we
You
would
should listen to
suggest
Ghost
going back
Inspectors.
and listening to Ghost Inspectors before listening to our process of how we made it.
Yes. So, Ghost Inspectors, Victoria. Why Ghost Inspectors? Where did this idea come from? Why write a murder mystery where the detectives have to solve their own murder?
My old roommate and I were driving home one night, and it was a particularly foggy night. I think it was probably on sort of like a rainy day. We were basically like sitting in the car and just thinking like, oh, this would be a really great vibe for an opening scene of a show. And then we were discussing like who would be in the show. And we kind of came up with the idea of like, oh, two detectives, definitely very detective vibes with like a foggy road at night. And then that kind of spiraled into two detectives who are solving a murder. Whose murder? Oh, it's their own murder. And I thought that idea was really interesting. And I kind of just took that idea and ran with it. From there, actually, though, it took me almost a year before I actually started writing the show. Like, I had the initial idea and I came up with sort of the general premise and the characters, but I didn't really start outlining or anything like that until a year later, partially just due to, like, my schedule. I was pretty busy with work at the time. I think it was helpful to give the story some time to marinate, too, and sort of actually think about what I actually wanted to talk about, what I wanted to explore with this story, because the basic premise is pretty straightforward, but all the other stuff later about like exploring grief through the story or um, adding characters who could see the ghosts kind of came much later.
So it was sort of like a top-down approach where the idea of the general structure of it came first, but the actual themes you wanted to explore and the characters who would be doing the exploring, that all came later during the writing process.
Yeah, I really developed that through extensive outlining. So what I did was I made one outline initially first. And that one, if you look back at it, it's so different from what the show actually ended up as. I actually looked at it recently and I was like, whoa, crazy stuff happens in that one. So I took that outline and then I asked some people for feedback. They gave me some pretty helpful suggestions and thoughts on what they thought was working and what wasn't working. And then after that, I redid the outline, restructured everything to work better, and also figured out what was going on with the serial killer, what's going on in Sagebrook, sort of distinguishing the personalities between Ned and Mulligan more. All that stuff really came together in that second outline.
So you'd say outlining is pretty essential to the process of writing, not just like an audio drama, but like scripts in general.
Yeah, at least personally, I'm pretty big on outlining. Like, I like to have a roadmap for where the story is going before I start writing any scenes or scripts. Otherwise, I feel like I'm sort of like feeling around in the dark. And I think if I did that personally, it would slow me down. Like, it would take me a lot longer to figure out what's going on, what needs to happen. So I prefer outlining. I know it's different for each writer, but for me, it's helpful to have a basic outline. And then obviously, as I'm writing, if I'm like, oh, actually, this scene is not necessary, or hey, we actually need to add another scene that I didn't think of initially, then of course, I'll put that in.
Do you have a favorite scene that you enjoyed working on? Maybe one that surprised you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the most fun to write was definitely any scene that involves bantering between characters or just like silly scenarios. So, for example, I really liked writing the scene in episode 2 when the ghosts are trying to get Oliver's attention because they realize he can see them, but he's trying to maintain this facade to the medical examiner that he can't be talking to the air, right?
Mhm.
And so that was pretty fun to write because I got to sort of play around with like, how would the ghost try to get his attention? How would Oliver try to play it off as if he's not hearing or seeing anything really distracting? Other scenes that were really fun to write were um this one was fun in a different way, but it was when Ned and Mulligan have their first real big fight. I think in episode what was it? Episode 5? No, episode 4. Episode 4 is when they have their really big fight.
Yeah, the
And
disagreement about
yeah, their
how to go at
disagreement
it.
about
Yeah.
whether they should go after the serial killer, how they should do it as ghosts, or if they should try to like stick to sort of like standard detective protocol. And I really enjoyed that because that's when the differences between Ned and Mulligan become the most clear. Like for most of the series, they work together pretty well. They're a team, they're friends, and they value each other's opinions. But now they're sort of like put in this ridiculous situation where they have to navigate the world as ghosts. One of them is more comfortable with it than the other, and all of that frustration builds in episode 4 until they finally just let everything out. And so that was satisfying to write because I had built up to all that. I had built up to that moment for the rest of the series, and so getting to write that scene was really great.
Really cathartic, I bet.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you have these two characters that are like clearly very different. They're sort of the classic polar opposite buddy cop duo, but like real conflict, real personal conflict in that scenario feels, I guess, earned in this case. Speaking of earning things, was there a scene that really challenged you? A scene that really you had to go back to over and over again in the writing process?
The most challenging scenes to write were any scenes with Adam.
Mm.
And going back to when I was outlining, I actually had a very different idea for what I wanted the serial killer to be back when I first started the series. At first, I thought, oh, maybe it'd be kind of ironic if the serial killer was like a really like basic run of the mill guy. Like I was sort of like playing with the idea of like there's really no justification for murder and or serial killing in this case, and having a character that just kind of doesn't really have a rhyme or reason for doing it, just sort of does it as almost like enjoying the art of it. I was like, oh, maybe that's the serial killer's character. But the more I developed it, the more I was like, I think it could work. It just wasn't like compelling me in for this story in particular. So I sort of like went back to the drawing board. I came up with the character of Adam, who interestingly can see ghosts. And I actually was like, oh, I think that makes his character even more interesting as a serial killer because you know what happens to people after they die, and you still feel justified killing them. Even then, like, as a writer, you have to sort of figure out what makes a character work, which is pretty difficult when it's a serial killer. Again, like I said, I personally feel like there's really no justification for killing people in that way. And so I still had to find a way for him to justify to himself
Hmm.
why it was okay. And creating that worldview definitely took a couple tries. So I initially wrote several conversations between Adam and Ned and Adam and Oliver, and those went through the most rigorous rewrites because I was like, I have to be really careful about how Adam explains himself, how the other characters react to him, and I want the listeners to also get the right message as I'm telling it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Adam's motivation went through a lot of changes. Do you think that made it difficult to complete the series, to write the other scenes? Because the villain's motivation is often like a very important driving force behind the protagonist's actions. Did you find that when you had to change Adam's motivation in these scenes, it had like a ripple effect on other scenes as well?
I definitely had to go back and sort of plant some more things. So, for example, initially the incense that was left at the crime scenes was sort of like it wasn't his calling card. I mainly had it at Ned and Mulligan's crime scene, and they sort of like through a series of conjectures, I guess, figure out that it's linked to the serial killer. But I realized there's a lot of hoops they have to jump through to draw that conclusion. So I was like, why not make him the incense killer? Why not make incense sort of his thing? And that also ties into his character of being someone who is connected with ghosts or just like spirits in general. And I think for him, it would be sort of like a tongue-in-cheek way of, like, hinting at who he is without giving it away. And so that was something I definitely added when I did rewrites, was just sort of clarifying that all of these crimes were connected by the incense that was left at the scene, because that's also pretty common for serial killers to have, is, like, something that connects all of their crimes together. Otherwise, it's like anyone could pretend to be that person. And I think serial killers have a tendency to want sort of that validation or the recognition, even if they don't want to be caught. So, other than that, though, in terms of motivation, I didn't have to change a whole lot. I did add a few more details about sort of calling attention to the fact that a lot of these murders were people that maybe wouldn't be missed otherwise. So, for example, we particularly called attention to like the librarian, and we had Ned say, like, I don't really remember her, even though I went to that library all the time. And that ties into sort of Adam's point of like, oh, I'm justified doing these murders because otherwise these people would have just been written off or forgotten. But I sort of gave them a reason to be remembered, even if it's like this twisted way. So I did add those details in.
So let's talk about your writing process specifically. I know a lot of writers pull inspiration from a lot of different places. What sort of inspires you as a writer? Music, imagery, other books or shows that you've listened to? What really inspired Ghost Inspectors during the writing process?
That's a really interesting question. I definitely am a big music person. Like, I love listening to music while I'm writing. And a lot of the things I've written in the past sort of have a specific album or artist that I sort of tie to that. Mainly, it's like, oh, that artist released an album during the time I was writing that. And the tone of it really matched what I was writing, so I listened to that a lot. Interestingly, for Ghost Inspectors, though, I actually don't have as much musical ties to it because,
Oh, man.
yeah,
So we
it's not
can't make a
very.
Ghost Inspectors playlist, is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
one of
We
my
don't have
friends
enough.
asked me, like, "Are you gonna make a Ghost Inspectors playlist?" And I had to actually sit and think about it and be like, "What music reminds me or makes me think of Ghost Inspectors?" And I honestly don't have a lot. It was actually more during the post-production process where I started finding sort of soundtracks that I would listen to while editing. Because when I'm editing, I can't really listen to anything with lyrics, so I would find really, like, sort of or I would find soundtracks from shows or movies that I liked and put them on really quietly in the background. That way it doesn't distract from the editing. So, shout out to the Apothecary Diary soundtrack, which is an anime that I've been really loving lately because that show actually has the exact same tone that I'm going for with Ghost Inspectors, where some of the tracks are really eerie and mysterious because the main character, she also solves mysteries in the show, but then there's also some tracks that have really like fun and goofy elements because it's also a pretty lighthearted show. So it's really similar to Ghost Inspectors in where there's moments of serious and dark stuff, but then there's also a lot of moments of levity. Like, I really would call this sort of like a comedy drama series. So I think that's the closest musical inspiration I have for the series.
Yeah, Ghost Inspectors really does juggle a lot of genres because it is, on the outset, a supernatural murder mystery. But there are, again, like you said, a lot of comedy and drama elements. But as the show progresses, like we find out, I guess, fairly quickly who, or at least our lead suspect is, in the shape of Adam. And then the mystery changes from who did it to how do we stop this person when we can't tell anyone about him? We can't communicate with anyone.
Yeah.
That's a pretty complicated plot to stuff into like 7 episodes of just audio. What sort of restrictions did you run up against writing for audio? Because you studied screenwriting specifically for visuals. So what sort of restrictions did you come up against? How did you get around those restrictions in writing specifically for a small cast audio drama with a really small budget?
Well, the benefit in terms of budget is for audio drama, I wasn't really limited in terms of locations necessarily because we can just create those with sound design. The trickiest thing was obviously limiting the cast. So it helped that it was mainly focused on the 2 detectives. And from there, when I was sort of developing characters, it was purely out of necessity. So I was like, okay, we have to have Oliver because they need a friend sort of on the outside. And they need someone to help them sort of do the things that they can't do, but also he can't be the character driving everything that they do. Back
Hmm.
to my initial outline, I actually had Oliver as a really active character in that first outline where the
Huh.
ghosts are kind of just following Oliver around. But then I got a note from someone who was basically like, it feels like Oliver is more the main character because he's the one doing everything and the ghosts are kind of along for the ride. So in my second outline, I really worked hard to make sure that the ghosts were much more active characters.
Would you say then that getting feedback from outlining and drafts is really essential to your writing process?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like I super value hearing other people's points of view because I'm the writer. So I kind of know in my head, I'm like, oh, it's working because I know all the details and everything that's going on. But having someone else who doesn't know the story as well read it to make sure that the things that I'm trying to convey are actually getting or actually coming across is really important. Because even like, because you were there during most of the writing process and you helped me develop and brainstorm a lot of the story. So even you were a little bit too close to the story when it came time to like reading first drafts and giving feedback. So I ended up like sending it to 3 other friends to get their sort of just like blank slate thoughts
Hmm.
on the show. Differences between writing for audio and visual is mainly that you can't because people can't see things, you sometimes have to just be a bit more descriptive, but honestly, I find that it's pretty easy to convey that through dialogue and also sound design, so the example I always give is in Sharon's shop. It's meant to be like this really like bombastic, like almost like hurts your eyes kind of place. There's so many trinkets, so many things to look at. And so we created the atmosphere by adding like a fountain and also like she has this like really like cheesy message that plays when people walk in and out of the door. And
Yeah.
then we found like off-brand Enya music for to play overhead. And it really like sets the vibe. But then I also had Ned and Mulligan comment on what the place looks like, particularly Mulligan, because she's so adverse to that it makes sense that she would comment on it. And so having your characters react to a space how they naturally would, like they don't have to walk in and be like, wow, this place sure is bright. Like, it was natural for Mulligan to be like, "Oh, what is happening?" And then Ned to be like, "Yes, it's amazing." And then that also like, you're kind of, like, hitting a lot of birds with one stone. You're setting the location and tone, but also adding more to their characters. So,
Hmm.
I found that pretty fun, actually, to come up with ways to do that.
And it's probably helpful too that the characters are 2 detectives in a murder mystery, so they have to describe locations and they have to be very specific with what they're seeing. The
Yeah.
genre probably enhances the storytelling a lot.
Definitely. I think it also helps that Mulligan is someone who sort of likes to think aloud as she's solving problems. So that actually lent itself well to audio as well.
Let's talk about Mulligan for a second. And Let's rope that in, I guess, too. Where where did the inspiration for these characters come from specifically? Was it sort of a story-based needs, like I need characters to be able to do this, and so here they are? Or did you have a more specific inspiration from real life or another story you were interested in?
I would say it's probably likely that I drew inspiration for Ned and Mulligan from other things I've seen. I've heard people compare them to like Rosa Diaz and Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I do love that show, so probably subconsciously some of that leaked in. But honestly, the characters of Ned and Mulligan I came up with before I came up with any story. Like that happened like really towards the beginning when I was first just like, okay, you have two detectives, they're solving their own murder, and just thinking of fun ways to make that situation even more fun and crazy, I guess. So I thought it'd be fun to have one detective who is really sort of like your baseline stoic, like almost stereotypical detective person, and then contrast that with someone who's a little bit more goofy, likes to like have fun with the job. And then I was like, oh, if they're ghosts, it'd be fun if that person was like really into the supernatural and becomes sort of like the leader in anything they deal with supernatural I guess. That's not really a word. But yeah, so the characters of Ned and Mulligan sort of fell in place really quickly, even before I had an idea of like, oh, they're gonna do this and they're gonna have to figure this out. It was more just like, I want to create a really fun dynamic and put them in this situation.
Two other characters that I'm really interested about the origins for. Sharon, who is probably the most eclectic character, and Jazz, who you voice in the show. Was that your intent from the start, or was it sort of you filling a role in a very small production that needed roles to be filled?
I didn't intend to play Jazz at the beginning. It was sort of like up in the air. I kind of felt like if I need to, I could play Jazz in terms of like the other characters that were available and my voice type. And so when I was writing Jazz, I just wrote her as she is. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to play this character, so I want like all these fun moments. It ended up working out because I just love her character and it was really fun to play her. But yeah, it was sort of like a logistical thing as well, where we were kind of like, okay, like we need to fill this role, and I can definitely pull that off. So I think she was purely almost like a plot necessary character because I knew I
Mm.
wanted an episode where Ned and Mulligan split up. And so for the first time, Mulligan has to figure out how she feels about being a ghost without Ned there to sort of like constantly be optimistic and like, it's okay, like being a ghost is great. And Mulligan's like, I actually don't feel great about this, but I haven't really been able to address that. And so meeting Jazz and actually like, I think sometimes it's weird, like, you sometimes are more honest with complete strangers than you are with close friends, because with close friends, you're almost afraid to hurt them if you're saying something that is sort of contrary to what they believe. Whereas with a stranger, you're more open to be like, well, I probably won't see you again after this, so maybe I'll just, like, say what's on my mind. And so I think that's very much the mindset that Mulligan is in when she talks to Jazz, where she's kind of like, what the heck? This is like a college student and she's really drunk. Maybe she won't really remember this afterwards, but she also is kind of wise. So I think I need that person to sort of like bounce my thoughts off of. All those moments were really fun to write. For the character of Sharon, she definitely was developed a lot earlier in the process. Again, like just adding to the cast of characters that I thought would really like make the dynamic really fun and put the detectives in interesting situations. So, sort of like going off of when I was developing Ned's character, and I was like, okay, he's gonna be really into the supernatural. And so I was like, okay, if he's really into the supernatural, maybe he has a psychic that he goes to see every week. And so then from there, I was like, okay, if he has a psychic that he goes to see, then sort of a natural response when he finds himself as a ghost is he's going to go and try and talk to her because they're going to be like, okay, no one can hear or see us. We need to communicate with someone sort of on the other side. And the perfect option is a psychic. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to develop this character of a psychic, and that's when the inspiration came to me of like, what if the psychic actually is faking it. And then that would lead to a really funny scenario where Ned realizes that this person that he's really confided in and put his trust in and paid a lot of money to is actually not been doing what he thought she was doing this whole time. I will say Sharon's character changed a little bit because initially she was fully faking it. Like she was fully a con artist, like just taking people's money without really having any like qualms about it. But I actually, as I was developing it, I thought it would be interesting if she does have a connection to like all things spiritual, but she just can't talk to ghosts directly like she thinks she can. But it's
Hmm.
one of those things where she's kind of like convinced herself, like, oh, like I've had these things happen in my life where I feel this connection to things that are happening in like sort of this other plane, but I'm convincing myself that I can fully like access that, whereas she really can't. But I think in her mind though, she does it to like help people. Like she feels like I can help these people talk to deceased loved ones or sort of like repair relationships and like unfinished business. And so that's why she does it.
It seems like it's a very cause and effect sort of way you've built these characters. You know, what does this character need to push him forward? Oh, it's Sharon. What does Sharon need to make her interesting? Oh, it's her relationship with the spiritual. Whereas I feel like some people are doing a more like top-down approach of like, oh, it'd be so cool if this was here and this was here. Okay, how do I get them to interact? But Ghost Inspectors appears it was built from the ground up, which I find very refreshing.
Yeah, I think again, like each writer is different, but for me personally, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I am definitely more of a character person where it helps to have a good sense of the characters that I wanna write before really, like, putting them in a situation, but from there, I'm also willing to sort of change things about the character to suit the needs of the story, and so the initial concept of, "Oh, it would be really interesting if they have to, like, get the help of a psychic," but then changing that to be like, "Oh, what would be another obstacle for them? Okay, the psychic actually can't see them, and so they need Oliver to speak on their behalf." So it's kind of like a little bit of both.
Hmm. What advice would you give someone who wanted to make an audio drama like Ghost Inspectors, but has never worked in audio before?
Ooh, that's tricky. I honestly think my biggest advice is just to do it. Just write something, maybe even just an episode of something, because we actually did a pilot before we made the whole series. And a lot of revisions actually were made after the pilot because we realized, oh, there's some things about particularly the opening scene of Ghost Inspectors that still aren't working. And so we revised them to make the dynamic between the characters even stronger and just like a stronger start for the series. I'm a big believer in sort of like, you don't know if it works until you do it. And you also learn a lot by doing it. So if you make a pilot for an audio drama, honestly, you can just like get a couple of friends together, record it. It doesn't even have to be on like really great microphones or anything. Just read it and sort of like put together a cut and see if it's working. See if the dynamics and the characters and the plot plays off each other the way that you want it to. And you'll also learn a lot about what you need to include in an audio drama as you're doing it. So, for example, in the opening scene of Ghost Inspectors, initially it was just going to be a conversation between just Ned and Mulligan, and they're just talking about all the cases they've worked on. And as we were editing, we realized it can definitely get a little bit dry because it's just two characters talking. There's not a whole lot else sound wise going on. They're just driving. There's some rain. It's a great like ambiance, but having an additional layer to it would really enhance it. So what we ended up doing was a montage sequence where we edited out all the things that they're describing in not real time, but just like I think you would see this similarly in a TV show where they would show like, oh, this is the college student who died, or this is the librarian, what happened to her, and sort of hinting at the serial killer that way. And so our solution was to do just the audio version of that.
Hmm. So, final question, the one everyone's been dying to know. Will there be more Ghost Inspectors? Any sequels or spin-offs? Just additional episodes?
I definitely think there's possibilities for it. It's interesting because, like, when I finished writing Ghost Inspectors, I was like, oh, well, I'm saying goodbye to these characters. It's kind of sad, but it is meant to be sort of a standalone miniseries. But I do think that I still have inspiration for either side stories with Ned and Mulligan, maybe back when they were alive and just doing detective work by themselves. I think it'd be interesting to get into like their backstory a little bit more, or with other characters. Like Oliver is such an interesting character because he Oliver is just a guy. Like he's just a guy who's like doing his job, but he also can see ghosts. So I think it'd be interesting to maybe get into his adventures. I also think it'd be fun to do sort of like a spin-off with Jazz because she has met and talked to so many different ghosts as opposed to Oliver, who's mainly only seen people he knows. And so perhaps a sequel series where Jazz just meets a bunch of different ghosts and helps them out and maybe has her own journey along the way, I think would be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be really fun.
Yeah. But for now, it's just Ghost Inspectors as it is. I am really proud of how it ends, and it feels really good as a miniseries. So I think I would only write more if I really had like a strong inspiration or reason for coming back to that world.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been our behind the scenes episode on writing. If anyone wants to contact you, Victoria, reach out to you, where will they find you?
I have some personal social media. My Instagram is @sincerely.vmc. We also have all our social media for Mouse Knight Studios. We're on Instagram, Blue Sky, @Mouse Knight Studios, and Tumblr as well. And you can follow us to learn all about our other shows that we have going on. And you can find direct links in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for listening to this behind the scenes episode. We actually have 2 more coming up. We're going to do one where we talk about specifically the sound design for Ghost Inspectors, and then another one where we're actually bringing on our amazing composer, Robert Mai, to talk about his process for composing for the series. So we're really excited about that. So please stay tuned for those.
He's the best. Don't miss it. If you miss it, we'll all be very sad.
And we'll catch you all on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.